Doing good today, man?
Yeah, it's been a weird week. I've been fighting the algorithms.
That's no fun.
It's March 2022, and this is the Pilote podcast with David Fuller and Cory Smith. What you been up to?
I'm a big fan of constant learning, and I try to expose myself to new ideas and different ways of thinking about things, trying to be not only empathetic, but just expose myself to different ways of thinking and different ways of doing things on purpose to get myself out of my comfort zone, to be more flexible and working with other people, particularly now that I work for an international company where I'm dealing with different cultures, so I can understand.
Maybe we're wired the same way. I love consulting because every week is something new. It's a different client. It's a different problem. It's a different thing to solve. Back when I was working for corporates, I just, wake up and say, well, if I don't go into work, there's 300,000 people who work for this company around the world. If I don't go into work for a week, they're not going to miss me.
They're not right.
If I work for a startup, there's only 10 people, then I'm 10% of the workforce, and that's a massive deal. Or solving a new problem in a new industry with a new group of people in a new market. That's what gets me up and each day, rather than this.
Yeah,
I know it all.
I think it's in a way hyper entrepreneurism, right? It's more than people that want to go start their own business. It's like somebody that wants to kind of start their own business every other day with a different client. You know what I mean? And I always tell people
but different people are wired differently, and I'm a problem solver.
Yeah, me too, man.
The thing that I like is that you give me a tough problem, and I'm like, right, I'm gonna get really excited about this until I solve it.
Right.
And when I've worked out the solution, I'm bored. That's someone else's job to go and deliver that.
Right.
I'm on to the next problem.
Solve it. Like, I don't want to maintain it or support it. I want to move on.
Yeah.
But and people always ask me, they're like, why are you drawn to this? Because when I talk to people, even people that I worked with 2 months ago, and I talk to them about what I'm doing now, they're like, that sounds crazy. Why do you want to do that? And I'm like, it's like people that are extreme sports or adrenaline junkies. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, this is our version of being an adrenaline junkie, of like, just like constant kinesis.
Which they sort of say to the mountain climbers, they say, why would you do that? Or, why would you go and surf a 50-foot wave? The answer is always the same, because it's there.
Because it's there. To finish my thought from before, so I was talking to one of my colleagues that works on a different continent, and he said this and meant it in the best way, and I took it in the best way. I just thought it was interesting. He's like, the thing about Americans that make them so great is their naivete, because Americans don't know that they can't do anything. Like they don't have, as Americans, we don't have any like social dogma, any kind of family or any really religious dogma that tells us that, or that constrains our thinking, where right. In other countries they do. In America's, like, we believe because we're awesome that we could just do anything, so we just do. We're dumb in a way, and we just believe we could do it whether we can or not, so we just go try it, and that's what allows us to kind of achieve things that seem impossible because we don't know any better. And I was like, that's interesting. I never really thought about it because, of course, being an American, you don't think about it. But it's interesting that other people perceive us that way and kind of admire that. If said another way, it would feel kind of insulting, like you're naive, but really it's kind of a compliment.
Which is actually a nice lead into what's happening in the news at the moment. The Russians going into Ukraine. I'm a digital global nomad and have been for 20 years. I'm an Australian. I've got a UK passport. I've lived in Dubai. I'm currently in Athens, Greece. I'm married to a Venezuelan, and I have a fairly unique view of the world. So when I see people on Twitter, and Americans primarily, this kind of, I'm not insulting you, but I'm going to your point that you just made.
Yeah, no.
I see tweets that say, this is the first time in human history that Twitter is being used to document a war.
No.
I'm like, well, there was Yemen, there was Afghanistan, there was Syria, there was
Iraq,
whatever else. One of the reasons this is different is that there are so many American tech companies that have resource in Ukraine.
Sure.
Especially e-commerce companies. So Magento, a lot of their development team are in Ukraine. There's a ton of big tech, high-tech American companies with coding resource or even support resource in Ukraine. And that seems to be making it differently, because suddenly you have Americans who have colleagues in an area which is under siege. So
right.
they might not have had coders doing Rails or whatever else in Afghanistan, but they've got guys they work with every single day in Ukraine that are suddenly impacted, and it changes their worldview.
Absolutely. Well, and there's a lot of international companies, like companies that are competitors of the company I work for, that are like offshore resource companies like Tech Mahindra, Infosys, Tata, that also have presences in the Ukraine, that have American companies that rely upon their developers in the Ukraine. Companies, I don't think, are just now starting to realize this might be a problem, or haven't quite realized that this is going to be a problem. But it is. But, for Americans, it's like, things that happen elsewhere don't really happen unless they impact us directly. You know what I mean? So they don't really think about it that way. And that's not to be pejorative. It is. That's the reality of it.
There's also a generational thing. I mentioned this last week, that there seems to have been a loss of knowledge of history. There's a gap in people's understanding that they weren't taught things that happened 20 years ago, let alone 30, 50, 100 years ago.
Sure.
So I get in trouble a lot by calling people out. But if you use the phrase to start a tweet, "This is the first time in the history of humanity," then you need to fact check that statement, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because that tweet went on to say, "This is the first time in human history that people have been able to send cryptocurrency to people overseas to help them with their struggle against an enemy."
Right.
And I'm like, hang on a minute. Bitcoin was invented in 2008. It's been used regularly since 2016. The fall of Aleppo was in 2016. So
right.
Come on. It's not the first time in human history. It's the first time you've noticed.
But you've got to understand that there are people that you and I work with every day that are in their 20s, literally don't know or remember a time that there wasn't Google. Like there was a time, like I tell.
Yeah, but they don't even remember 9/11.
Right, they 100%. So like I've had conversations literally with young people that I was like, there was a time before Google, and they are in disbelief, and they're like, "What did you do?" And I was like, "We just collectively didn't know shit. We just walked around not knowing things." And this kind of parallels with what we're talking about, is the how technology is so ingrained in everything that we do. Technology is integral to every part of our lives, and we've made it that way.
For better or worse.
For better or worse. And like I had this kind of realization recently on my birthday of like my contribution to the negative things that I've built over the years, 30 years in digital, of contributing to e-commerce and social media, building these platforms, and all the negative that it's done. Because, think about like all the good things that the promise of social media when the platform economy started, and we all worked to build these social media platforms. And like the idea was good. Like this is where we're kind of at with Web3. It's like, oh, we're going to build these social platforms that's going to bring people together, and they can stay in touch with long lost friends and relatives and share pictures of their kids and find long lost loves. And it's turned into this thing that's like divided us and torn our social fabric.
Or you can take a video on your phone and send it to the world without it being censored by a producer or a news editor or whatever else. And whether that's a guy being kicked in the head by a policeman in the US, or whether that's a Russian soldier doing something in Ukraine, there's a certain democratization around
100%
this information being able to be shared.
This has brought, like, this all happened so fast that we didn't even have the time to think about, is this good or bad?
The technology is agnostic. And that brings us into something like Bitcoin, which in the last week has been used to donate millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars of Bitcoin have been sent to Ukraine as donations. Decentralization in that sense is a great thing because there's not some NGO that's taking a percentage or a government that's kind of hiding some of it and not giving it all. It's a transaction that happens between an individual who owns some Bitcoin and sends it to another Bitcoin wallet. But the Bitcoin ecosystem has no morals. It just says, okay, you want to send Bitcoin from place A to place B. It doesn't care. But then there's a certain number of people who are saying, but that should only be available to Ukrainians. It shouldn't be available to Russians because the Russians are using it to get around sanctions. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a technology agnostic technology like blockchain and say, well, this is designed for good people and we should apply it for good people. But then we need to reach out to the head of Binance and say, can you turn off all the Russian accounts because we don't really like the Russians? It goes totally against the ethos of the whole Web3 and crypto.
Right. Well, and I think that's the kind of, for lack of a better word, the moral struggle that we're going to continue to fight against or push against. We've already pushed against it in every iteration of the web in some way, shape, or form, and it's only going to get bigger and more complex as we go into Web3.
There's been some really interesting things happen in the last week or so where law enforcement have been able to track down criminals using cryptocurrency a lot more easily. Guess why? Because it's a public ledger. Because they can track the transaction in real time, even though it's pseudo-anonymous. They can still see that $2 million has gone from this account to this account.
Right.
And it's recorded forever in the blockchain. If this had been done in cash, in the way that, old-fashioned drug dealers did it, and they put $1 million into a bag and then put that bag into a ship and took it across international lines, there's no way they can trace it. The advantages of blockchain favor everybody. The good guys and the bad guys.
Technology doesn't have any morality. It's like not a moral construct, right? It just does what it does.
Let's just switch briefly to something happy. And it's basically digital pets, specifically digital dogs.
Give me guys that are poor, smart, and hungry, and no feelings. You win a few, you lose a few, but you keep on fighting. And if you need a friend, get a dog.
So these are basically animated digital dogs. They're hyper realistic. They look amazing. They have their personality. You look at it and go, wow, this has got a personality. It's not a two-dimensional ape with lasers coming out of its eyes. It's an AI based.
Paint a picture, Dave. You paint a picture.
Exactly. So it's an AI based pet. This is maybe one of the first projects I've seen that a real person, an average person, could actually get behind. A Web3 project where they'd say, yeah, an AI-based digital dog is something I can get behind.
This is like one of those things that anybody at any level of understanding can like relate to and would get them to try it. To get them involved or to try the metaverse, to try Web3. This is like your starter kit. I think it's a great thing. I looked at it. It's the beginning. We're at the beginning.
It's the beginning. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about open world gaming, and there's some games like Far Cry and Fallout. And Fallout 4, the first companion that you have in the game is a dog. I don't necessarily want to walk into the metaverse alone, and I don't necessarily want to walk into the metaverse with a robot. If I can walk into the metaverse with a 3D AI blue healer, then I'm up for that.
I think most people love dogs. You don't want to take a cat with you into a game. They're not really a companion that follows you. They're just kind of like a moody roommate.
Well, they're quite crafty, so I think it depends on the game, really. Some people will say this is complete madness and stupidness. There's dogs that they have, real-world dogs, that they train to sit next to witnesses in courtrooms to calm them down. Dogs that help people who are blind navigate the world, and there's dogs that calm people down, and there's dogs that just. And if you can translate that in a VR world via an AI that learns potentially when you're up, when you're down, and you can do it through semantic language and say, okay, Dave's sounding a bit angry right now, or he's sounding a bit sad right now, or he's sounding, and that dog could react to that semantic language, which I don't think is that far away.
Well, I think there's also a fundamental disconnect that people have about technology generally. They expect technology to do amazing, big bang, incredible things. Think about like how popular like Pokemon Go was.
Right.
Like it's the most simple, entertaining things that are the ones that catch the imagination of people. It doesn't have to be something that's like, solves the world's problems or the most amazing technical gadgetry that is the thing that's going to catch on. It's things like the digital dogs.
It's the old school Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Exactly.
You've got your survival. You've got an AI dog is not going to solve world peace. It's not going to bring world peace, but it could bring some joy to a few people. Could make people laugh. And
that's in short supply right now.
Exactly.
Let's be honest. Let's say some joy is in short supply right now. There's, we're coming out of a pandemic. People like the great resignation or the great reassessment. We got the thing in Ukraine. Like the world's geopolitics are just in a weird place right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. A little bit of joy right now wouldn't hurt people. I just think that, again, I'm just going to say it. I just think it's going to be things like digital dogs that are going to be the entree for people to get to experience the metaverse. Like this is where it begins.
It's utility. At the end of the day, it comes back to utility. It's not speculation. It's not, I can sell my digital dog for 3 times more than I paid for it. It's something else. I can get an emotional benefit from it, and that's worth more to me than selling it for 3 times more than I bought it.
And there's no investment other than time.
We will be back in just a moment. The Pilote podcast is all about disruption. We're always looking for people to join the conversation. It can be disruption in any market or industry, so get in touch via the links on this page if you're listening on the website, or via the show notes in your favourite podcast app. Now back to the show.
This week, we're going to talk about personalisation. For me, personalisation was the ultimate promise of digital, of the web.
Right.
So the most oft-quoted marketing phrase of the last 10 years, it's been said 1 billion times. I know that 50% of my marketing works. I just don't know which 50%. What I want to do is I want to do a short history of marketing, really, really short. Commerce begins in a small village. You know all your customers. You know them one by one. Let's say you're a butcher, and each day your customers come up to you and they say, right, I want lamb chops today. I want sausages today. I want a brisket today. I want a roast on Sunday. Right. And you understand each one of your customers because there's only about 50 of them, and their habits are pretty predictable. So you get to understand them. Then you can build an upsell, and you can say, okay, well, it's Sunday and you normally buy a roast, but how about you buy a bit of mint so you can make some meatballs as a starter?
Right.
And then your market gets bigger, and your customers start coming from further away, and it gets harder to understand them. Or there's now 1,000 customers in the city, and you can't keep track, right? So you say, okay, I know that there are a group of people who buy a roast on Sunday. I know there are a group of people who like sausages. I know there are a group of people who buy lamb and chicken, but not pork. And I'm going to start talking to those people in slightly different ways. Then you get to mass media, print, TV, radio, whatever else, and you're suddenly talking to millions of people. It's impossible to talk to every single one of those people in a different way, or even a group of those people. So you have to create a message, which is what we call a broadcast message. Right? Marketing becomes a very broad brush approach. And the internet was supposed to solve that. The internet was supposed to say, okay, I know that Cory landed on my website. Great. Things like Google Analytics allow me to understand a little bit more about you. I know that you came using an iPhone. I know that you came from America. I know that you came at a certain time of day. I know that you landed on a certain page. If I'm a sophisticated marketer, I can start to build my messaging to you if there's a way that I can talk back to you. And yet, even the biggest companies in the world, the companies that know more about me than anyone else, Google, Amazon, Uber, they still can't understand me. They still can't target me as an individual. What are your thoughts about this, man?
So, well, let me ask you this. Who do you think does know you and does do a good job of it?
No one.
Really?
I can't think of a single brand who has private information about me. I've been using Amazon for over 15 years. I've been using Google for over 15 years. And not one of those companies ever sends me a personalized marketing message. Not one.
Fair. So I'll say, let me begin by saying this. Number one, I'm an edge case, like you always say. You know, there's always a cost to personalization, right?
Right.
So you're giving up your information, your data to receive with the hope, right? With the aspiration of receiving personalized offers and messaging, which I'm okay doing. Like,
so am I.
Because I desire that, right?
Yeah.
Not only as a curiosity, as a marketer, I guess, but I also want to receive product recommendations. Next thing I want to say is I can't think of a brand offhand that does do a great job of this. Although I can tell you that there are platforms that provide marketing platforms that provide a good platform that does this for their advertisers. So I think that the Facebook algorithm does a good job of it.
Right, because they've got more demographic information than anyone else. There's a lot more knobs that I can tweak on Facebook than some of the other platforms. So I absolutely agree with you on that one. Yeah.
To be a social media marketer means to have to know and understand the Facebook marketing platform, and it's pitched and sold as being easy by both Facebook and people that are saying, like, learn in 6 hours how to be a social media marketer, and you can't because it's very complicated. But also, I find Amazon to be not terrible, and I say that because I get a lot of product recommendations, like, you know, you may also likes from Instagram and I click on them from Instagram and from Amazon the most. But I buy a lot of stuff from Amazon. But I think, but those are more platform oriented than brand, and I consider Amazon more of a platform than a brand. A lot of what they're selling is third party.
All of it's almost all of it's third party. So that's the difference between a marketplace and whatever. Amazon doesn't get me at all.
Never?
No. I get diaper ads on Amazon.
Really?
I don't know whether they've moved on from the original algorithm, which is people who bought this, bought that. Some of these algorithms seem really basic. Like last night, you watched a Quentin Tarantino movie. Here's all the other Quentin Tarantino movies there are. Netflix is the same. Netflix used to do a pretty good job of saying, okay, here's the last 5 things you've watched, and here's some recommendations. Now they seem to have gone back to a more broadcast model. So I'm living in Greece, and Netflix is now giving me the top 5 things in Greece. I'm an Australian who speaks English living in Athens, and Netflix is giving me the top 5 things in Greece, which are watched by the Greek population. So those recommendations are completely irrelevant to me.
Yeah, I don't want to get off on streaming services. I don't think any streaming services do it right. I think they all are terrible. I don't have cable or satellite. I all 100% streaming TV. So that's all I watch. Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, Amazon Prime. This is the problem with decentralization as pitched by the Web3 crowd, right? Right?
So the Web3 crowd are all saying, if all this information is centralized in a certain bad actor, whether that be Google or Facebook and whatever else, they're basically saying you shouldn't be giving all the data to a single entity. But if you're watching 6 different streaming services and those 6 different streaming services don't talk to each other and they don't know that you watched a certain film or episode of a certain thing on a different platform and they don't talk to each other, then how can they make decent recommendations?
That's easy. I could solve that problem. I wish we did this podcast on video. I could do it on a whiteboard on Miro.
Bonus episode.
Right. Well, the idea of like having this portable identity and you carry your stuff around with you in the decentralized Web3 universe.
I use a product called Trakt, Trakt, just because I was watching so many series and I had no idea which one I was up to and what I was watching. And especially when you're into NCIS season 17, episode 12. You just have you've got no idea where you are. And terrestrial broadcasters never tell you what series or episode you're watching. They just broadcast it. So I started using this system called Trakt. You're right. If I could take Trakt and I could share that information with Netflix so that Netflix knew exactly which films I'd watched and which episodes of which series I'd watched and how I'd rated them, and then incorporated that into its recommendation engine without giving it to them, then I can see how that might work in the future.
Now that we've kind of discussed a little bit, you're right. There isn't really anybody, and I'm glad you pivoted to streaming services, because that's probably where I would have went. Like, that's where I would expect to see it in the most practical application of it in today's world is in streaming. But I can't, and in shopping, and I just can't think of anybody that does it great. Like I said, as a platform, Facebook does well, but I can't think of anybody that does it well. But I also think that marketing in general, and the way that we approach and think about marketing, and marketers are kind of lazy. It's just it's the same construct of like Walmart thinking that you're going to need a shopping cart in the metaverse, right? Like, we're very kind of stuck in our ways about marketing. You're right.
Coming back to what we said at the beginning, there's a lot of marketers who don't understand global marketing. They understand what it works in their bubble in their particular country. As I said, I've worked in the Middle East. There's probably 20 languages which are spoken regularly in Dubai. So you've got maybe 10 languages that you need to optimize your marketing for. Personalization, if you only are doing English, can be relatively simple. If you suddenly put that into a global market in a place like Dubai, and you have to personalize not just on demographics and behavior, but also language, that's a ton of copy you've got to write. That's a lot of headlines. That's a lot of call to actions. That's a lot of text. That's a lot of landing pages that you've got to create in order to speak to a whole bunch of different people. So I can understand why marketers don't necessarily have the resources or the budget to be able to personalize across languages or across cultures.
People hyper focus, like you said, they don't think globally and they don't think broadly enough about marketing. And we hyper focus on quick returns and not on the long play value of marketing and how personalization plays into that, right? And I think that people become averse to giving their data for personalization because there's not enough what's in it for me for the people that are getting it, because we're not giving them good personalization.
You know the worst advertiser is when it comes to personalization?
Tell me.
Apple. I get served an Apple ad and I click the little button that says, why am I being given this ad? And the response is, Apple wants to promote this ad to everybody living in this country. It's broadcast. It's old school. And maybe it's because the CEOs of a lot of these companies are still come from a TV, radio, and print world, yes. And they're still thinking in a TV, radio, and print mentality. I'm going to send the same ad to every single person living in this country, irrespective.
Of course. Have you seen their ads? Of course they live in a TV world. They're more about style than substance.
If you're in the e-com business, which I think are probably at the absolute forefront of digital marketing, e-com is a really interesting space. I'm not going to get into the difference between third-party data and first-party data right now, but basically, if you're an e-commerce store and you know your customer going back to the butcher who lived in the marketplace 2000 BC, and the guy comes up and buys sausages every third day and buys a roast on Sunday, e-commerce stores know this using pretty much off-the-shelf e-commerce technology. Right. You know that if somebody comes to a certain page on a certain brand page and that's a data point. They then went to another page and they added Chanel perfume to their basket, but they didn't check out. And you can have an algorithm that basically puts those people into a segment in real time. Yeah. And they exist in that segment until something else happens. And I only exist in that segment until I do something else. If I then take that thing out of my cart, I'm no longer in that segment. The technology exists to be able to market to those people in real time based on that behavior. That's possible. So why am I still getting diaper ads from Amazon if they
Why am I still getting diaphragms? Hey, well, it's interesting. It's 2022. In 2014, I worked for a brand agency, and we did some work. I'll say the company, Foot Locker, and we were looking at doing some. We're going to be putting some beacons in store. We were looking. This was a test for Foot Locker, putting beacons in store, so that when you walked into Foot Locker and you walked by a certain pair of shoes, it would use near field communication to pop an alert on your iPhone or your Samsung, and it would instantly send you, hey, this shoe that you're standing next to right here is on sale. That was in 2014.
This is where it gets the line between cool and creepy. There's a company in Dubai that has a partnership with Qualcomm. If you have an app installed on your phone, it can access the GPS data from the Qualcomm chip down to 2 feet, and it knows exactly where you are. This sounds like a benefit. If I, the night before, got onto my phone and started browsing the latest car in a certain dealership, and then I put the phone down and I went to bed, and then the next day I walked into the dealership and the technology went, I know that device was looking at this particular car last night, and I know that particular device is currently standing 2 feet away from that car in a physical location. As a marketer, that's gold. But as a consumer, potentially that's creepy. If you suddenly got a message saying, hey, we know you were looking at this car last night on your phone, and now you're standing next to it. Would you like?
But that's the razor's
5% off?
It's like you got to be creepy, but not too creepy. Like where's the creepy line? And I think we generally know where it is, but it kind of varies a little bit by person, like what they're willing to give. I think you and I are willing to give a little bit more than most people are. Because
and suddenly you get an ad for something you were speaking about.
That happens more and more frequently.
That is creepy, and that I'm like freaks me out.
And you know what? People say that all the time, like to each other, but I don't ever hear anybody talking about that. We should do a segment on that. I'm gonna do some research on that. There's a difference between segmentation and personalization. I don't think personalization is that hard. For people out there, any listeners that are that have their own store, e-commerce store, and they want to do personalization, I don't want to scare people away from it to think it's hard. Personalization is as easy as, like you said, plugging in MailChimp to your WooCommerce or your Shopify and just sending emails that say, hey, Dave, or hey, Cory. Right. And then you can become more sophisticated from there. But when you're a company like Netflix or Apple or Amazon, I have a higher level of expectation. And if Netflix is listening, I have a really high expectation of you.
They should know me better. They should know me better.
You should know me better than anybody. I watch Netflix probably 3 hours a day.
My problem is Netflix is the thing I'm going to recommend is not something in my library.
Right.
Well, no, because they only have a certain amount of content. So if I've watched everything that there is already in Netflix that matches my profile, then they've got a problem in personalizing for me. They can't recommend me something because they don't have anything in their library that I haven't watched.
If you go back to I just watched a Quentin Tarantino movie, I can recommend another Quentin Tarantino movie, or I can recommend another movie with any number of actors that appeared in that Quentin Tarantino movie, or I can recommend another movie with a theme that's similar to that.
Netflix doesn't understand my entire movie or content watching history of my entire life. I'm not going to go back and tell them that I watched a Kevin Smith film in 1991. So Trakt knows a lot more about... Oh,
so you're saying outside of that. Okay.
Yeah, Trakt knows a lot more about my entire lifetime of content watching history than Netflix does. So how do I tell Netflix that I watched something in 1991? At the moment, Netflix has no way of doing that. There's no way for me to say to Netflix, I've seen this and I don't want you to recommend it to me again.
Hey, one last thing about Netflix, in case they're listening. The one other thing that makes me mad is if I'm watching this, you know how it will autoplay the next episode, right?
Yes.
Well, you're watching something, which happens to me a lot. I'm going to cop to it. I watch things late at night, and you're 7 episodes into an 8 episode or 9 episode thing, and you pass out and you fall asleep and you sleep through the last episode, and then the show disappears. Like you can't find
I
it again.
have experienced that. Yes, I know
And I'm like,
exactly
where
what
the
you
hell
mean.
is the show? Yeah, that happens to me all the time. Anyway, Netflix, fix it. By the way, I've got a lot of compliments on our last episode. In fact, I've had a couple of my friends be like, that was my favorite one. Because they're like, you guys talk about the metaverse too much. I'm like, yeah, we know. We've been working on changing it up.
Yeah, exactly.
So they were like, yeah, the last one was good. They particularly liked the experience story.
Right.
That we did. They were like that one. So I think this one that you did on the personalization is good.
Please, Court, is there a question anywhere in our future?
Can you explain that?
Would you buy from a vendor where the about page says serial entrepreneur?
What do you think about that? Well, I would say generally no, but it would depend. Again, edge case, I would probably go look to see what their other serial entrepreneurships were, like what they had done in the past. But I mean, like generally, no. Sometimes these guys are good. You know, they come up with good ideas.
So if you're thinking of serial entrepreneur as someone who started 5 businesses in the last year, then that's a bad thing. But if you're talking about someone like Jack Dorsey or anyone else who started a business in .com1 and has had 3 or 4 businesses in the last 20 years, those kinds of serial entrepreneurs I can get behind.
Right. But like somebody that's like had 5 businesses in the last 2 years, I'd be a little suspect of.
So at the end of the day, it comes down to context. If you think serial entrepreneur is someone who just can't make up their mind and wants to have a portfolio career, then I totally agree that this is not necessarily someone you want to necessarily buy software from. But if that serial entrepreneur is Richard Branson, then that's a totally different story.
It's just that, you know, I don't want somebody who's like got the attention span of a ferret on a double espresso. I want, you know, like I value in entrepreneurship. But I also don't want somebody that's got ADD either. You know what I mean?
There was a bit more nuance. There was actually a bit more nuance to the question, and it actually said that whether the founders were serial entrepreneurs, which I think also makes a difference in my book. And there are certain founders of startup companies who are going back to what we said at the beginning of the podcast. Different people have different skill sets. And there are certain people who have really, really great ideas and who can evangelize, raise money, build a team, and get a company to a point where it's a sapling. You know, if you want to use a tree metaphor, it's a sapling and it's starting to grow. And that founder is no longer having any fun. They want to go off and they want to start the next thing. So they're quite happy to just walk away, hire a CEO, a leadership team, and who can take that business to the next level, and they'll walk away and they'll found something else. So I've got absolutely no problem if the founder is one of these founders that just can come up with amazing ideas, get the business into a certain stage, raise some money, hire a leadership team, and walk away and then start a new business. If that's the definition of serial entrepreneur, then absolutely every day I would buy from that company.
Yeah, sure. I agree. People are afraid of the word risk, particularly companies.
The word entrepreneur does not exist without the word risk.
If you can't accept risk, if you can't truly fail fast, fail forward, if you can't truly be agile in your mindset, not agile methodology, just be somebody who can think and pivot and be open and flexible, like you can't survive as a company in today's business environment, just period. Things move too fast now.
We've mentioned this phrase before, which I learned in your part of the world, skin in the game. And there's all these entrepreneurs who want angel money, VC money. They want someone else to fund their risk. It used to be a little bit different. Entrepreneurs used to go out and mortgage their houses and back themselves and say, I believe so much in this idea that I'm going to go and mortgage my house, or I'm going to go and get a bank loan with massive interest rates on it and
I think people got spoiled, and it started during the internet boom when they were just like handing out money. Do you remember that? Like when everybody, like I worked for 2 or 3 startups, like they were just giving away millions. Like it was like, oh, you got an idea for the internet? Here's the $1 million or $500,000. And they were just giving away money, and you didn't have to have anything to show for it, right? Like there was no, like didn't have to have any business model to show how you're going to make revenue. They were just like, oh, you're having a startup and it's on the internet. Here's $1 million. And then like the bust happened, and like it seemed like people wised up. You know what I mean? But there's still people out there getting money for things, and you're like, why?
I think we're back to that, especially in places like Web3. You know, there's people raising money just because they've used the word Web3 in their pitch deck, and they're getting a bunch of money, and they've never run a company in their lives. So.
Let's get our first round of VC capital, and let's ask for some astronomical amounts. We can move to California.
Apparently, everyone's moving to Miami. Everyone's moving to Florida.
Oh God!
Apparently,
I can't go back to Florida. Maybe if we can raise enough money, we could buy a house on like like one of the private islands. Or maybe on South Beach or something where it's like swanky, where I could wear like a loose shirt and a lot of gold chains. I might do it. Maybe.
Is that what your metaverse avatar is going to be?
And that's what happens if you stay in Miami too long, is like you wear like, silk shirts that are open too far with gold chains, and you get really dark and leathery. And
do you remember the soundtrack from GTA Vice City?
Oh, yeah.
That is why I have teamed up with Medallion Man, the shop for Medallion needs. Medallion Man caters to all levels of masculinity. For the strong, silent type, a medallion the size of a hubcap will say everything that needs to be said. Even singing medallions for the Casanova, who knows music is the food of love. Model trains, dollhouses, diapers, whatever your interest, we've got the medallion for you. Don't forget, every woman knows if you can't support a medallion, you can't support a family.
So this week we have a bonus section. Cory dives deep into knowing your limits and staying in your lane. Here's our conversation about teamwork, vision, and boundaries.
Well, yeah, as I was saying before, I try to be open to learning, and I'm always learning. Even as a leader, I'm always learning. And so, like I said, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, so I try to be open to situations where to learn a lesson from a situation. So a little story time. I think I had mentioned previously, maybe I haven't, that we were working on a big pitch for a big, huge corporation recently. And ultimately what the company we were working with was looking for somebody to help them create, or we're looking for a partner that could help them on a global scale, right? So they were looking for a partner that could provide them help and be a partner to them in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, and in North America, which typically we can do as the kind of company we are, because we are a global company with like 57 offices and 26 different countries or whatever. This particular thing that they wanted to do, we just didn't have the presence locally in the markets that they wanted. But what they were doing was really cool, and I really wanted to do it. I was like, hey, let's get creative. And I was working kind of in a vacuum, not with the rest of my team, and kind of came up with this idea of like building this ecosystem, right? And I was like, here's what we'll do. We'll use our teams that we do have experience and capacity to do this work that we can do in these markets. And then we'll work with partners, like partner companies that do this work, that are in market around the world, to do the work in the markets that we can't do. And we'll build this ecosystem of partners, and we'll bring it all together. And, our company would be like the single throat to choke kind of idea. And through this ecosystem, we'll be able to deliver this work, and it will be great. And we'll all work together and sing Kumbaya, and we'll do this great big deal. And it'll be this, and it was really complex. It ended up being really complex, but in my mind, it sounded really cool. So like I put this whole idea together, and I went back to the team, and I'm like, hey, here's how we can do this. Because they were all like, man, it would be really great if we could do this, but we just don't think we can do it because we don't have the global scale. And I went back with this really big idea, and I'm like, hey, here's how we could do it. And I was all excited, like I'd solved the problem, right? And they were just like, yeah, I don't get it. Yeah, but this is how we can do it. And really what it boiled down to was, yeah, like it's great for you, dude, that you came up with this really nifty idea, but we're the ones that are going to have to coordinate and make all this stuff work. So it's really cool you came up with this idea, but we're not like, we've never done this kind of thing, this kind of complex partnering kind of idea before. And it's scary. And we've never done it before. And this is a huge deal for a huge company. And this makes us nervous. I had to take a step back from it and realize, yeah, it's a cool idea for me because I get to like come up with this solution and then like toss it over the fence to the people that actually have to do the heavy lifting. And then I get to be the consultant that moves on to the next thing. And then they're stuck with it. And they're like, hey, this is like a $10 million deal that's on a global scale that you just like dropped on us like a piano. And we're not that excited. We're not as excited about it as you are. And I had to take a step back from it and be like, and kind of put myself in their shoes. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, man. And it was like, as cool as the idea was, I had to like really think about, you know, like it's one thing to have like stretch goals for you and the team. It's another thing to push them off the cliff. You know what I mean? Well, and you know, like I came to realize, and this comes with age, some, and just kind of professional maturity. We ended up withdrawing, by the way. We withdrew from the pitch because I just didn't, they obviously weren't comfortable with it. And I didn't want to push them over the cliff, right? I just didn't feel like we had other business in other areas with this client, like other RFPs we were doing with them.
Right.
And I didn't want to jeopardize that. And I didn't want to push the team over the cliff. Some things are more important than winning the deal or the money. We got to win the deal. We got to make the revenue, like whether we're incentivized through commission or bonus or through our salaries, or there's just an expectation set. Sometimes it's better for the health of the team to just say, you know what? We're just going to pass on this one. It's not the right thing. Let me ask you one question about this, and then we don't have to belabor it. So the other side of that coin is, so a customer comes to you, asks you to do something. It's not exactly in your wheelhouse, but they do have the budget. They're like, hey, we got money, whatever it takes. Can you do it? But it's something you may have never done before, or that you don't know that you can do. Would you take it and figure it out?
Depends. It depends.
I know like if somebody's like, hey, we want you to build a building or a bridge, like, of course, I'm not an engineer, but if it's a technology thing and they're like, hey, we want you to come and build this thing and the unlimited budget, do you think you could do it? I would be like, I just wanted to verify that we both have the same addiction to like problem solving, because if it was something cool, even if I had never done it or maybe not done it many times before, and somebody paid me enough money, I'd be like, okay, I'll do it, because I just can't not do it. You know what I mean?
You see a job ad that says, oh, you need 10 years experience in this industry. And it's like, no, you don't.
No,
you really don't.
I guess it depends on the person. We come from a different time and a different era. Like when we started in the beginning of the web, nobody knew anything. So everybody was figuring it out. You know what I mean?
It's like crypto. You see job ads today that say, oh, you need 10 years experience in crypto.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's got 10 years experience in crypto.
No, nobody has 10 years of experience. But that's what I was talking about. Like this problem solving thing is like, so when we worked at the Le Mans, when we worked in the American Le Mans series, we worked in motorsports. You know, when I worked there, they would come to me and they would say, we need to figure out how to do in-car cameras and stream it to the web. Can you figure that out? I would always say yes. I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
But I would figure it out. Or we want to get wireless internet at the track. But
that was back when you had to pay Brightcove $100,000 to do streaming.
Yes, for their stream video. Right. That's exactly right. Can you figure it out? I'm like, yeah. And I would just go figure it out.
That's it for this week. We'll speak to you soon.